Hi, I'm David Abrams, and I want to welcome you to this edition of the Tenant Experience Network podcast. I want to welcome today's guest, Jon Love, CEO of KingSett Capital, a leader in the commercial real estate industry, who took time out from his vacation with his family to talk with us today. In this episode, we will learn about Jon's journey to his current position at KingSett with over $13 billion in assets under management. We will tap into his thinking around working in the moment as one of his keys to success, and get a glimpse into what is top of mind for Jon as he continues to navigate through new challenges and emerging opportunities. We're excited to be sharing this podcast with you, so make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode of the Tenant Experience Network. So now I'd like to welcome Jon to the show. Jon, really glad you could be with us today and looking forward to our conversation. How are things?
Great. David, nice to be here.
Awesome. So let's start with your journey. Tell us about your path to your current position at KingSett Capital and how you got started. Walk me through that, please.
Well, after graduating university, I started as a retail stockbroker, did that for 5 years. It was a terrific training ground because it taught me how to communicate with other people, how to sell, how to formulate and express ideas. I then started with Oxford, and I was started as a leasing manager, then a property manager, then development manager, city manager, regional manager, and ultimately became president and then CEO, and did that for my last 11 years at Oxford, selling Oxford in 2001 to OMERS. And then after a 6-month sabbatical, I started KingSett in the spring of 2002.
Wow. And the rest is history. Now, I don't want to date you, but I think Oxford, your career there began in 1980, which means you are celebrating your 40th anniversary.
Yeah, how about that? Actually, I'm celebrating my 43rd anniversary to my one and trophy wife.
Well, even more important. That's awesome. Congratulations. So why do you think you were so uniquely suited to this opportunity? Are there any unique skills that have helped you to become as successful as you are?
Well, I wouldn't say I possess anything that is unique or frankly complicated. I think that the secret in building a business is, I really think comes down to building relationships. Every business has to provide a solution to its customers, and what we do is no different. And understanding what a customer needs, and in our case, there's different stakeholders, understanding what they need and delivering a solution to them is sort of the core, the core tenet. And it is fundamentally all about relationships, because relationships enabled me to assemble the capital, assemble the people, and assemble the broader ecosystem around KingSett that makes it operate.
Right. Really interesting. Any advice for someone wanting to follow a similar path?
Well, I would say don't try to be somebody else. Most important thing I think a young person can do is focus on the here and now. I can tell you that often people are thinking in the future at the expense of executing in the present. And it's fundamental to get ahead, to execute in the present, because I can tell you the senior people, leaders, can all tell those who are contenders and those that are pretenders. And being a contender is someone who's getting it done in the present, above and beyond the expectations, doing more than just what's required. In any office, I can walk in and you just have a sense of who's who. So right. Number one would be focus on getting the job done here in the present. And number two is you don't know what the pivot's going to be. I didn't start 40 years ago thinking I'd be here today. I didn't start KingSett 18 years ago thinking we'd be here today. But I sort of approach life unencumbered with a strategy. So live in the present, execute, get it done, and you know what? Stuff just happens. And be open to pivot, to take advantage, understand opportunities, because there's no such thing as luck. Luck is just an opportunity recognized. And the difference between people who are deemed to be lucky and others is their ability to recognize an opportunity and seize it.
Okay. So there isn't, you do need that moment in time to happen, but your point is you've got to be able to see it to identify it.
I'm telling you, that moment of time happens to people all the time and they miss it.
Right.
Happens to people all the time and they miss it because they're focused on something else. How many times do you go into a meeting and you start talking to someone and you say what you want to say, and when they respond, all you're doing is thinking about what you're going to say next.
Right.
You're listening. And God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Right.
And it is the same thing with the only way you can seize or understand an opportunity is to listen.
Well, I think listening is probably one of the hardest skills for all of us. There's a difference between listening for the sake of responding and listening for the sake of hearing. And I think you raise a great point. So what's the biggest challenge you're experiencing right now, and how will you overcome it? And I know there are no shortage of challenges right now, but what are you thinking about most right now?
I think the biggest challenge is taking an organization of 120 people working in 120 different places on their own and, sustaining that collective vision. This is no way to build a business. It's like we're holding our breath and we're doing the best we can. I'm communicating extensively with everybody. We've got webinars. I send out a note several times a week. We do all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it's hard to build and create when you're holding your breath. And the digital interface, as much as people say working from home may be important to them, it's sure not going to be a way forward for us, because I need my team together. I need the energy of that team together. So the biggest challenge is figuring out when and how we can move back together again and get on with things. From a business perspective, it's a communication story. Communicating with every stakeholder around the compass, what we're doing, why we're doing it, what we see, what we think. And, in the cloud of a crisis, which was, really peak panic was early April. And you don't know peak panic till it's over. And so you can look back and say, well, that was peak panic. But in the cloud of a crisis, it gives rise to almost any kind of prediction on the rainbow getting a voice that it wouldn't otherwise get. And that's a very unsettling thing, particularly when you're isolated and you're not with your teams, and in many cases, people were isolated on their own. So communication is the biggest challenge. Getting our teams back is a challenge, and we'll be patient. We'll wait until, the government says, okay, now you should do that. That's fine. And we're, prepared for that day, whether that's tomorrow or in a month or, I don't know, a year or whenever it is. Doesn't matter. But that's the biggest challenge we're facing.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that this has been an incredible experiment. Those that have already come out and declared that this is, the new way in which they will work indefinitely, I think are very naive. I think they're going to regret those words. I think we're going to find that people absolutely need to come back, want to come back. I think great companies, great products, great businesses have been built, but I think the reason why we've been able to sustain through this insane period of time is because of all that capital that was built up prior to this, literally a closure over the course of a weekend. And I agree with you. I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think, when I look at my own company and I know how, we want to be and how we want to be with each other, we're getting it done, but we're not doing the best that we could be doing. And we can't wait to be back.
I make an observation. If you're in a 6-person team and one is working from home permanently, how long is it before it's a 5-person team?
Right.
So, I think work from home will have a primary place in flex work. I think that you'll see more and more, modified work arrangements where people have some flexibility, whether it's a childcare issue or whether it's a commute issue, and Monday to Thursday they're in the office and Friday they're at home doing, administrative duties or whatever. I think it'll give rise to all sorts of different combinations like that. But the permanent work from home, it's unimaginable to me how you build a relationship to somebody when you have to schedule it.
Right. Yeah, we've had that same problem. That the notion of scheduling, we often, spontaneously would just share ideas, would share thoughts, and I know that our co-founder, has repeatedly mentioned to me that he takes notes on pages, all across his desk at home, and then, doesn't find the right time to actually share that, discuss that,
Yeah.
move into a
Well,
conversation about that.
I've said several times, you can't schedule
Right,
spontaneity.
right. Agreed. So if I gave you an extra $100,000, now maybe in your role, in your position, I should make that an extra $1 million. But what would you do with it right now? How would you spend it? How would it help you through this crisis?
So if I had an extra 100 million, because that's really what you meant,
Okay.
um, I would use that, primarily to build horsepower, to look forward for opportunities. It's early yet to see opportunities, because we'll have to see the shape of this recovery and how it looks, and see where there is opportunities. I think in Canada, it's entirely possible that there really aren't any opportunities because it's not obvious there's any stress yet, but that too can change. So if I had 100,000, I don't know what I would do. If I had 100, I would make sure I have capacity. And I should say, in all of our fund strategies, we have over $1 billion of uncalled capital. So we have a lot of horsepower to address opportunities should we see them.
Right. Okay. So I'd love to just get a sense of any resources, mentors, colleagues, books that have really helped you along your journey. We don't get there alone. And there are just so many inputs. And I'm just wondering, where has the most influence come from for you?
So, I've learned so much from so many people, because I think I tend to be a relatively good listener, particularly an observation about me. And, it starts with my mother and father. The first manager I had at McLeod Young Weir, the Scotia McLeod, lenders I've dealt with, business partners I've dealt with, bosses I've had. I've got a whole list of sayings that really resonate with me and really shaped how I think and how I have conducted myself. So, and these people don't come in one suit size or one role description. And I should add my wife. Like all the people around us will share insights all the time if we're prepared to listen to it.
Right.
And it is those moments where you are most stressed or anxious, where someone will come up with something kind of golden, and you walk away and say, that's pretty interesting. I'll give you just two sound bites. Mm-hmm. One is when I started at Scotia McLeod, my father, after like a month said, how's it going? I say, well, it's a bit slow, because they teach you about the markets, but they don't teach you how to sell it. He said, well, do you have an idea? When you see someone, you should have an idea. Well, that stuck with me my whole life, because, young people today are told they're supposed to network, but they're not told what that means. Mm-hmm. And so the message for young people is, when you see someone, you should have an idea. You should have an opinion on a piece of news. You should have an idea, something you wouldn't otherwise see, just something. And, for me, that changed everything.
Right.
In my early Oxford days, I was struggling on a business issue with a counterparty, and I said, I don't understand why they don't understand. And of course, the impetuousness of youth, surely I was right? Anyway, so my boss at the time, wonderful guy, Vern Tatham, wonderful guy. He said to me, John, he said, communication is the responsibility of the sender. And wow, boy, like that was a lightning bolt. Anyway, I've got 36 of these, right? And that have shaped how I think, how I act, and how I respond.
Well, and I'll bet you've provided that role for many, for others, and perhaps even on occasion when you're not even aware. I'll share with you one story. I actually saw you one day on the subway. You got on. We hadn't met yet, so I didn't know you at that time, but I recognized you, and I saw you connect with another individual. And I think he might have been a very early employee at KingSett, a very young and new employee. And the way in which you engaged with him and talked with him and gave him voice, it was just really interesting to see that. And I think that approachedness on your behalf was really just interesting to witness. So I suspect along the way, you've been doing that for many, many others as well.
Well, I mean, I always think that relationships go two ways, and if people are kind enough to engage with you, no matter what your age and stage is, you respond in kind, I love the subway. I love the subway for a few reasons. I mean, I can afford a car actually, but I find the subway more efficient. But I also find it like it's a social experiment, and I can make almost anyone smile on a subway.
Right.
And when it's really crowded and you're tight with people, that's when it's the most fun.
Yeah. Well, you did make that young man smile, that's for sure. And I can tell you that I've said to my team, I actually, believe it or not, I miss the commute. I'm missing the subway commute because it is so real world. It is so real experience. And just coming from, upstairs to my downstairs office, it's not cutting it. And I can't believe I'd ever say that.
Yeah. Well, I think also for most of us, the commute is a good transition of headspace from, home to business. And, you sort of try to process and leave those things at home and then try and ramp up and get your mindset, for work. And, not having that, as you say, walking down the hall or whatever you're doing, it seems like, I mean, I must have gone for 70 days. I felt like I was working all the time, every day.
Yeah.
And, that's just unhealthy. So trying to figure out how to have breaks, and we're pushing our people, you got to take your holidays, and holidays, you got to turn off the appliances. And, this happens to be a non-appliance week for me, and you're the exception. So, and I've got, a whole herd of grandchildren out there, that will go tubing as soon as we're done. But it's important to have that break from work, and, I put on a shirt, and then I'll go back to whatever I was wearing before.
Yeah, no, I agree. For me, it was very much, I know you're at the cottage, and the transition from city to cottage, that drive for me is what creates that space to allow my mind to shift from, regular work life to a more relaxing work life. And for me, that commute was doing the same. So we're on the same page. Can you share any details about something new that you're working on, either you or your team, that you think our listeners might find interesting?
Well, we're pushing down the road on the Northview acquisition, which was announced in February. And some people might say, well, that timing was a little bit imperfect, but the fact is, the multi-residential asset class continues to perform, and there's a number of conditions that have to be completed. But as soon as those conditions get completed, we'll move forward with that. We're working on all sorts of plans to make our buildings safe and productive, and so on, which is all underway. I've gone to see our malls that are open. I was in Saskatchewan last week, where we have the City Center Mall in Regina and Saskatoon. And what's interesting is, like, this, I think retail will be the sleeper. The story's better than you might think. Mm-hmm. Traffic is 65% of what it was same time a year ago, but they're all shopping. So I went around and talked to store managers. I talked to 6 different store managers. How's it going? How's your supply chain? How's your employees? How are your sales? And they're pretty upbeat. And, so and everybody is beating their COVID reduced budget. Okay. COVID reduced. It's a little bit, the story's a little bit better than people think. And I think that's encouraging. I mean, retail is a relatively small part of our business, but it's just as a broad observation. So we're also working on a whole series of ESG initiatives, and we were delighted 3 weeks ago on World Environment Day to announce Scotia being carbon zero, which is actually a pretty cool achievement. Right. And we've got a whole variety of other things that we're doing at the same time. So we are trying to move the needle.
Fantastic. So here's sort of the question. You need to look inward, and I know you mentioned earlier you don't feel you have any special or unique skills, but if you could have one superpower, what would it be and why?
I'd have the ability to change politicians' minds.
Wow. I, I'm not sure I should ask the follow-on question to that as to either
Oh, please do, please do.
which politicians or how you would change their mind.
Well, I think as a global citizen, I'd start with the reconstruction of globalization and working together globally, which probably starts with a rethink of how the big five leaders think of each other. Domestically, I think we have to be more inclusive of every region, and what's going on in Newfoundland, Alberta, Saskatchewan, is not constructive for the country. And as Central Canadians, we're kind of immune to sort of seeing all of that because our media lives in 3 blocks of the CN Tower, and like our politics rotates between downtown Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa, and like whatever. But that's actually a bad set of facts because we have a lot of other Canadians, highly talented in other regions, that need public policy looking at what they specifically need, and we have to better address that.
Okay. What are you curious about right now? Anything that you're thinking differently in light of current circumstances that sort of got your attention?
Was that one of your questions? Oh yeah, it was too. Sure. So, I think we'll see the acceleration of some changes, which are good. I think cash is dead. So it's interesting. What impact does that have? I mean, for me, I can pay with everything with my smartphone. But what happens to a panhandler? What happens to Cubs and Scouts that are selling apples on Apple Day and stuff like that? So that's one thing. The second is the integration of e-commerce with bricks retail. How does that evolve? It's been evolving for 20 years. It's going to continue to evolve. But I think there's some interesting changes on the retail front that will provide some great opportunities. I think in residential, there's been talk about deurbanization or other things like that. I think people have always moved in and out of cities, and nothing will change. But I don't see deurbanization as a big trend. Probably the biggest thing of curiosity might be who fills the void that the U.S. has left, and what does that mean? Because the U.S. has clearly said, we're going to leave all these global institutions, and no vacuum remains unfilled. So is it China? So will China, Russia? I mean, I don't know. It doesn't seem to me that, given a choice, the U.S. would continue to lead the world, but it doesn't look like we have that choice, at least at the moment.
Right. And of course, all that can change. One never knows. We have an election coming up in the U.S. and as much as
I think the biggest problem is no matter who wins in the U.S., the country will remain deeply divided. And that's what I'll offer is, the biggest difference between Canada and the US is the division in politics, because while, you and I may not agree on, you might be a conservative and I might be a liberal or vice versa, it doesn't matter. But, I don't dislike you. And we can have a beer together. And we might disagree on policy at the margin and whatever. We always have disagreed at policy at the margin. That's okay. What the tribal politics in the U.S. is unfortunate, and I mean the U.K. has also exposed itself to this sort of tribalism and the resulting Brexit, which is going to be a mess.
Right. Well, we'll move on from politics because that could be another episode. Is there anything you wish you had known when you first started out? Our final question. Just what do you wish you had known way back at the beginning?
I thought about that question, and I, part of it, I'm going to give you a regrettable answer. I don't sort of think in those terms. I think that I was probably more intense when I was younger, but if you're not intense, I don't know, like you're going to be left on the curb. So, I think if I was to tell a young person what I wish I'd known is work in the present. Focus on executing today's job. And the breaks will come your way. They did for me. And it's always difficult to know, to go back and say, would I have changed something? I don't know. Like, could I have been more successful? Could I have been taller, thinner, maybe? Thinner for sure. I don't know. Like, so those are hard things to ask. But I think, I don't think, it's important not to take yourself too seriously. Mm-hmm. Get the job done, be intense enough, and work in the present. And stuff happens. Right. Good stuff.
Right. But I think that notion of working in the present and making the most of every moment, that is right in front of you, that philosophy will hopefully, from your perspective, I think what you're saying will lead to the right things will happen, right, and will lead to the right opportunities. So that's a great way to look at things. Thank you. So listen, I really appreciate you spending time with us this morning and taking a little bit of time out from mingling with the grandkids. I hope that you continue to take that downtime in your sacred space up north. And I look forward to engaging again in the future. Thanks so much.
Great, David. Thank you for having me on.
Okay. All the best.
Take care.
Bye now. I want to thank Jon Love for joining us on today's podcast and for sharing his journey from early beginnings at Oxford to now leading the team at KingSett Capital with a portfolio of $15 billion. Great learning for all our listeners and an opportunity to gain insights into what it takes to be an effective leader. Please be sure to join in again for future discussions with leading professionals and industry experts who all have something to say about experience in the built world and the impact that technology is having on the largest asset class in the world, commercial real estate. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on a future episode, please reach out to me directly at david@hiloapp.com. And until our next episode, I wish you all continued success in building community where you work or live. Thank you.